Now that you know more about the history of Dare America, its programming, and specifically Keeping It Real and stakeholders, I'm going to walk you through the logic model concerning Dare Keeping It Real program theory, moving from left to right, from inputs to outcomes. First, I should note that our basic understanding of how Dare Keeping It Real works was informed by online research. To supplement it, I reached out to Dare America and confirmed high-level general details. However, the depth of details, especially concerning monitoring and evaluation and available data, was not able to be provided, which would have been better and I think would have strengthened the evaluation and our understanding of how Keeping It Real works. However, this is discussed further later on when we talk more about our conclusions and our suggestions. So this is the Dare Keeping It Real program theory of change. As you see on the left in the black box, we start with the existing Keeping It Real curriculum before you even get into the inputs of specifically Keeping It Real. As Haywan mentioned, the existing Keeping It Real curriculum was invented or created by Pennsylvania State and also Arizona State researchers during the late 90s based on psychosocial behavioral research that was emerging in popularity at the time. So this Keeping It Real curriculum, again, as was already mentioned, was optioned by Dare America in 2008 and then adapted to the Dare America way of essentially implementing programming based on older programs. So going to the darker blue section, which is inputs, you see that we have 5 inputs that I'll be discussing. You have self-selected school districts. The school districts model is actually very interesting. Dare America relies a lot on its name recognition and the long history of its programming throughout the U.S. to essentially allow schools to come to them and request Keeping It Real curriculum of them. They don't proactively go out and try to recruit schools or recruit districts or communities in any sort of way. So the reliance and the onus is definitely on the school districts and representatives, parents, whatever interested party it is, pushing for these districts to approach Dare America and ask for Keeping It Real. This sort of model is made possible because Keeping It Real and Dare America specifically does still receive substantial funds from the U.S. government. However, the amount of funding is not specifically available. On usaspending.gov, which tracks this sort of funding, everything after 2003 is redacted. I did try to get confirmation of, if not funding amounts, funding sources, and I was unable to do so, but presumably the sources are still, as they were in the past, Department of Justice and Department of Education. So then you move on to Dare Keeping It Real program staff, the third darker blue box. The program staff are critical once the school districts approach Dare America and ask for the programming, and you have the funds from the U.S. government coming in already, to working with the school districts to actually implement the programming and also adapt it, which I'll discuss during activities. You have local volunteers and students as probably the 2 most critical inputs in terms of actually being the catalyst for getting this done. Local volunteers are trained by DARE KIR program staff, and then they go on to teach the students, which again, I'll discuss during activities. So activities start consolidating a little bit. There are 4 of them, and they're pretty straightforward. Again, these were confirmed directly with Dare America. District schools pay Dare Keeping It Real for services rendered. They pay $129 per student, which is a very low rate, and again made possible presumably because of the underpinning of funding from the U.S. government that Dare America receives. Then Dare Keeping It Real program staff and local volunteers work together with the self-selected school districts to train local volunteers in using Keeping It Real curricula. They adapt the curriculum to the local context. This is something that the Dare America staff I spoke to were very proud of. They mentioned that this is a standard 10-week course. This is a curriculum that's supposed to be applicable to all students because it deals very much with universal themes of peer pressure and so on. But that, for example, if one area is having a particular bad drug epidemic, the curriculum can be adapted to further address that issue. If another area is one in which gangs are very active, the curriculum can sort of focus on that more than other items or more than in other areas where there isn't really a gang problem. So that adaptation is extremely important. And again, these first 3 activities that I've just discussed are all pre-actual teaching the curriculum, which is the last activity, teaching DARE, Keeping It Real to students. That's done directly by the local volunteers. At that point, the program staff is not teaching directly at all. And then it leads to initial outputs. There are 2 initial outputs. Those are the ones that come up first. an X amount of local volunteers trained. This isn't standardized in any way by Dare America. It's not based on school district size or anything. It's based on local availability of volunteers and their willingness to do this. And then, again, the item that they're very proud of, the curriculum is adapted for local use 100% of the time. This leads to the second column of outputs in green, which is that X amount of students, again, varying by district, receive 10 weeks of tailored, adapted, DARE Keeping It Real education. And then that goes into DARE Keeping It Real training cycles continue annually. This was kind of an interesting output because it is very much, it's an assumption, and it's very built into the program theory of DARE Keeping It Real, that the training cycles will continue annually and 5th and 6th graders will indefinitely continue to receive this curriculum. There is a local volunteer, very brief refresher course that the volunteers are expected to take before they go ahead and teach the curriculum every year after their in-depth training. But DARE America doesn't specifically address whether if the program cycles are interrupted, if schools elect to opt out of certain cycles, come back in, if they completely stop implementing Keeping It Real, how that affects the program itself and the effectiveness that Keeping It Real is going for. So all of the things that I just outlined from inputs to outputs are underpinned by a couple of assumptions at the bottom in the purple box. They're underpinned by the willingness of school districts and volunteers to actually execute and implement DARE Keeping It Real. Again, this is something that's a huge assumption given that Keeping It Real does not proactively, through DARE America or any other means, go out and identify clients. And that DARE Keeping It Real curriculum addresses community needs. This is an assumption that's built into, as well, the activities and outputs in the curriculum adaptation that I mentioned earlier. So all of these lead up to the outcomes, and there are a couple of sets, the proximal and the distal. The outcomes are over at the very right in orange. So the proximal outcomes are that student recipients of DARE Keeping It Real are able to develop 3 distinct skill sets. They can exercise self-control, they can make safe and responsible decisions, and they can communicate more confidently. These are explicitly stated by DARE America and by Keeping It Real's essentially change that they will catalyze. And these are supposed to be things that students are able to start doing, start exercising, start using immediately after receiving Keeping It Real. This is supposed to lead to a distal outcome, which is the fulfillment of DARE America's overall vision, which is pretty grand. It's a world in which students everywhere are empowered to respect others and choose to lead lives free from violence, substance abuse, and other dangerous behaviors. So as you can see, it's a wide umbrella. It covers a lot of different items, and therefore the outcomes are very much underpinned by the idea that the kids who go through DARE Keeping It Real will indeed encounter situations in which they can apply what they learned in the curriculum and do so in a way that's sustainable, do so in a way that continues to build the skill sets that are mentioned in the proximal outcomes, and therefore grow into adults that achieve the distal outcomes. So DARE Keeping It Real does have a broad scope. There is a substantial leap between outputs and outcomes, and that will be discussed a little bit more later.
Very good.